On this show, nothing is censored and no topic is off the table. If you want to call in, 361-646-7167 is the number. Today is our very first show. I want to welcome everybody to the show. We've got some guests that I've had the pleasure of working with.
And the more money we keep pumping into the economy, the worse this is going to get.
We already know Europe says it. Europe has already said, the Bank of England, 18%. They are in a recession, and they're targeting 18%. We've got EU saying they're looking at somewhere between 17 to 20%. They're in a recession. Everyone in the world is in a recession. Everyone in the world is looking at double-digit, almost 20% inflation going through 2024. And the United States is the only one who's saying, no, it's all under control. The economy is great. Remember, vote Democrat. And I guarantee you, a week after the election, they're instantly going to go, oh my God, who could have known we're in a recession? It's not our fault. It's those damn Republicans. You know that's what they're going to say. Yeah.
I have friends who cannot eat meat anymore, and they tell me they can't afford it. That's how bad things are now.
I agree. It's gotten crazy where people are having to make some very difficult decisions in life. And that's going to there's a great line if you watch the movie. It's the one with Steve Carell where they talked about the last economic crash. There's a great line that was thrown out there that for every 1% the unemployment rate goes up, 40,000 people die. And that's the reality of economic impacts in this country. We're at a point where the layoffs are just starting. Walmart's announced layoffs. Ford has announced layoffs. We're starting to see, they refer to it as belt-tightening measures. And when those happen, that's going to dump a lot of people into the unemployment pool. And the jobs that are available right now aren't going to pay what those jobs that they lost did. So it's going to be ugly. It's going to get really ugly.
As a great example of that, there is one, we have the student loans, which are being redistributed to everyone in America, costing $600 billion, increasing inflation, hurting everyone. But did you hear, I don't know if anyone's heard this, and that's the fact that minimum wage, $15 minimum wage is coming back. They're trying to bring it back. They just went to the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, for the third time. And for the third time, the CBO has said, if you raise the minimum wage to $15, 1.7 million people will lose their jobs. There's only 1.1 million people who get minimum wage. But this is the whole idea. The government's going to take care of you. Except they don't think it through. They don't understand the consequences. And they're creating a bigger problem than what we already had. And imagine, we're going to have 1.7 million people lose their jobs, plus the small businesses that close that can't afford to pay $15 an hour, as we're at 15% inflation and in the middle of a recession that's global, with a food crisis, 40% less food starting in October, that last 1 year. Does anyone think that's going to be a good thing?
Well, you're absolutely right. The student loans is a perfect example that you brought. I'm personally going to be a beneficiary of that forgiveness, but I don't like it because it's not fair. Some people paid those loans back, worked 20 years. Some people even finished their last payment when they're retired to pay those loans back. What do we say to them if we're forgiving those loans for somebody else, like me, for example? That's totally unfair. And if somebody made a mistake, then that entity or person is the one to be held accountable and correct that mistake, not pass the bucket to all other taxpayers' pockets who did not even contribute or benefit from the problem.
This is all about personal accountability. And what's happened is the government stepping in and going, well, you can't let these people be personally accountable for their mistakes they made, decisions they made, and the debt they've run up. We're all going to have to assume it, and that's not fair at all.
So those colleges are profitable, and they should be the ones, taking care of the loan debts of these students if they, in fact, gave them degrees that are not worth the paper that they're printed on.
But you know the problem here? It's not the students. You know, and I said this before, you know, a 22, 23-year-old kid, he sees a pile of money over there. Of course, and, you know, for the last 30, 40 years, we've told everybody, you know, the government's going to bail you out and everything. You know, we are from cradle to grave relying on the government. So is it any surprise now that, you know, these kids that have grown up, the millennials, the Gen Zs, they just look, I can't get a job, so pay off my bill. Well, we've been bailing everybody out. I mean, 2008, we bailed the banks out. We should have let them fail. $900 billion. We bailed out every company through COVID, trillions of dollars. So everybody gets a bailout. So why wouldn't these students say the same thing? Hey, where's my bailout? You know the problem? The problem's with government. They're the ones giving it away.
You're correct. And I've seen it go. Our system's so screwed up that literally in the 90s, I had a friend, my best friend, a friend of mine, who was getting divorced, wife living in the house with him with her kids. He's paying all the bills, and New York State paid her, and they were taking money from him, even though they were all in the same house. That's how screwed up the system is. But we've been adding to the problem is we keep adding systems and layers of this stuff. We now have the red flag laws. Because of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, we've now given an incentive for every state to add a red flag law. For every person that they put onto those red flag rolls that strip them of their Second Amendment rights, strip them of their property, and in many cases their kids, the state's getting it paid per person, so they're incentivized. And the red flag laws do not require any violation of law. We've seen that in Illinois. I think I just want people to know this is something we see at every level of government.
Consequences don't matter. I was in debt $30,000 years and years ago. I didn't think anyone would pay it off. I would never even ask anybody to do that. You got to own up for what you did. And I understand the students, you know, they're not given a choice. They're just taking the money. I think they've been asking this for years. This has been on the table, legislation, for a while, but nobody was crazy enough to do it until now.
I think that the universities should be held, you know, if we're going to be bailing out all these students, we need to start going to these universities and making them pitch in and, you know, pay their fair share. They should be held accountable too, because they allowed, you know, they took that money and they raised their prices because they knew if college went from 50,000 to 55, the next year those kids were going to get the loan for 55. Then it goes to 60 and 65. So they ought to pay some of that money too.
Oh, absolutely. You take a look at Harvard, for example. They paid, what was it, $800,000 for Elizabeth Warren to teach one class.
Yeah.
You know, those costs all get passed down in the form of tuition.
Well, have you noticed something in common? The government always only bails out their partners in crime, the colleges, the banks, the insurance companies, and so on. But the government never bails out the real American victims of Enron, you know, and Murdoch. So what happens to these people who get defrauded? The government doesn't bail them out.
It's going to get ugly. And it's going to get ugly in, I think, about 2 years. I don't know. Vass, you worked on Wall Street. What do you think?
Well, a couple things. One of the biggest things, going back to colleges for a second, one of the biggest costs of colleges actually isn't the football coaches, believe it or not. It's the fact that since 1980, the middle management of the colleges have increased by 300%. And that's because they've added on departments like lesbian dance theory, African studies, feminist courses. That's what they're filling in the middle to justify the fact that they've also consistently increased their tuitions, knowing that every time they do that, they're big-time donors. The colleges and their unions are major donors to the Democratic Party, who then fund more loans, which then keeps the whole cycle going, which is a bubble that needs to burst. But that brings me to what you're talking about with the digital currency. We, in 4 years, literally in 4 years, 2026, the CBO has estimated that we would be at about $40 trillion at current growth rates. If every projection is correct, at interest rates that are where we are now, we're looking at $40 trillion in debt. Not 10 years to get to 50. It's going to take us 4 years to get to $40 trillion. It's ridiculous. And so that's unacceptable. That doesn't even count the fact that we have currently $175 trillion. That's with a T. I'm not misspeaking here. $175 trillion in unfunded liabilities. That's the true debt. Now, if you try and take all of that and convert everyone's dollars into a digital currency, you are creating with that much debt that is not being paid off but being transferred. That is exactly what we saw happen in the 1980s and early 90s with all of South America. We have a term for it. It's called Banana Republic. Some kids may find it offensive these days, but that's the term, and it's applicable because your money will be as numerous and as worthless as bananas down in South America. That's why it's called that. So there's our big danger. And you're right. It's not just that we're redistributing the money, which is a problem.